You're listening to Spiritual Matters with Energy.
We're joined now by Eckhart Tolle. Hello, Eckhart. Very good evening. Welcome to the program.
Hello. Thank you very much.
It's great to have you on with us here.
Thank you.
Now, I want to start by talking about consciousness. And here we are on this beautiful planet. Life could be like a dream. But for very many people, there's a lot of suffering in the world. What is that about?
Well, a large amount of the suffering that humans experience, of course, is actually self-created. If you look at the human history, or just take 20th century history, you'll find that far in excess of 100 million humans, probably as many as 150 million human beings, were killed by other humans. This is just a staggering figure, almost impossible to imagine. And all that suffering, of course, is man-made, and it must originate, if humans create such a reality on their planet, it must originate in a state of consciousness, collective consciousness, that has a strong element of dysfunction in it, because only a dysfunctional state of consciousness could create such insanity that is human history. We are so used to it when we hear these things, but if you look at it objectively, it is almost unbelievable. So I would say then we need to look to the root cause of the suffering that humans inflict on each other, and the suffering they inflict, of course, also on the planet and on nature, and the suffering even that every human being, through dysfunctional use of the mind, inflicts on him or herself. That's another matter that perhaps we'll come to a little bit later.
Now, if we go back to the beginning of time, were people conscious? I mean, originally, was there consciousness there, and it kind of distorted along the way?
Well, there are, in mythology, the mythology of almost all cultures, there are stories of the so-called Golden Age that in the myth of many, many cultures. And in the Golden Age, it is said humans lived in a state of harmony with each other and with the planet, and a state of happiness. In a way, even the story at the beginning of the Bible, the Garden of Eden, is a version of that Golden Age myth. So it is quite possible that humans at a very earlier stage in their development lived in greater connectedness with the transcendent reality, one could say, and with themselves and with each other, and that they gradually lost that. And my feeling is that they gradually lost it because the mind, the ability to think analytically and to interpret the universe conceptually, that over many millennia this ability grew, and so thinking activity became more and more prevalent. And through then, which of course it was on the one hand an enormous step forward in the evolutionary process, but on the other hand, humans lost their connectedness with the source of their very being, and because they became more and more identified with what we could call the noise in the head, the continuous thought processes, which analyze and judge and fundamentally create a sense of separation between yourself and the world out there, between yourself and the other human being, or the other group of human beings, the collective. So I think the loss of inner peace have happened over a long, long period of time, and the dysfunction grew, but at the same time, the power of the mind also grew. So I think what we have been going through was a necessary evolutionary step, although it looks sometimes like a regressive step, but I don't think it was, because initially I believe humans lived in a state of natural connectedness with the transcendent, with being. They were naturally in a state of peace without even knowing it, because they'd never experienced anything else. And so we had to lose that in order to regain it at a deeper level, because if you lose something and then you regain it, you're then suddenly much more conscious of it, and you can go deeper with it. There's a story in the New Testament, I think, that exemplifies that, and that's the story of what is usually called the prodigal son, which is, I think probably everybody knows it. The son says to the father, "Give me my inheritance, I want to go out and experience the world," and the father reluctantly gives him his inheritance, and the son goes off and squanders it over the years, becomes destitute, becomes a beggar. By the way, the version in the New Testament is only one of many versions of the same story that exists in the Middle East. And the son then, in a slightly different versions of the same story, the son even forgets where he came from. The son sits there begging. He's squandered all his resources, and he lives there abroad in a foreign country. These are all significant symbols. And then the father sends messengers to his son to ask him to come back home. And then as the messengers reach the son, messengers in this are the symbols for, I would say, spiritual teachers. The messengers come to remind the son who he is, and then finally the son begins to remember, and he returns to his father's home, a home country, his own home, and the father immediately loves him deeply, in fact, more deeply than before. And the other son in the story in the New Testament, who hasn't left home, says, why do you seem to love him more than you love me? He says, "Oh, I love you anyway, but this son," says the father, "was lost, and now he's been found again." So the story seems to imply that here the father loves him more deeply. Now, this is not to be, I don't think of God as a father or anything like that, but that's the old terminology, which really means once you regain a lost state, you regain it, but it's not just a regression to that earlier stage of innocent, or you could say innocent, happy childhood of humanity, but it is a regaining of the innocence of the child, but with the added dimension of knowing, of depths. And this is our destiny, and this is really, I would say, what spiritual awakening means for us here now, is to regain what humans probably a very, very long time ago lost, or not really lost, but something that became obscured or covered up through the evolutionary development of the mind. And now there's the possibility, which the earliest spiritual teachers like the Buddha and Jesus, they pointed out to the possibility of living in a different state of consciousness. That really is the basic message of all the great teachers. They just use different words to point to it. Both the Buddha, for example, and Jesus recognized what I mentioned just earlier now, the dysfunction in the human psyche, in the human mind, in the human consciousness. Jesus called it sin, or original sin, and Buddha called it suffering. You are in a state of continuous suffering. And they both realized that there is a way out of that. And the Buddha simply called it the end of suffering, and Jesus called it the possibility of living in the kingdom of heaven, which is not a place that is somewhere else. He very clearly said, it's not over there or over here. You can't see it, as he said literally in the Testament. You cannot see the kingdom of heaven. It does not come with signs to be perceived. So it's not, the kingdom of heaven is not something that comes in the future or is a place that is somewhere else. Kingdom of heaven is clearly a dimension of consciousness, an inner state of consciousness. So he points to the possibility of living in a different state of consciousness and the necessity of seeking that. And that was a necessity then, but it's a much greater necessity now for humans to enter a different state of consciousness, because if we don't, if we carry on in the same state of consciousness that has produced what we call human history, which is a history to a large extent, a history of madness, if we don't change, then we are going to create more and more havoc on the planet and ultimately will bring about our own extinction. It's urgent now that we embrace the new consciousness.
You say this, but people don't seem to be, or not that many people seem to be waking up to this message, and people seem to be carrying on with very little regard for the environment. So why aren't people sort of taking control of this and doing something about it?
Well, many people are actually beginning to awaken out of the dysfunctional state. It's not always immediately obvious when you listen to the news or consume the media in whatever form. It's not immediately obvious because it's, to a large extent, the media is still run by people who represent the old consciousness, with a few notable exceptions. And from my position, because I'm at a kind of focal point around which the change of consciousness happens, I get continuously messages from people who are telling me that they have gone through a significant shift in consciousness, with lessening of suffering, an enormous amount of happiness coming back into their lives, and more conscious relationships with the world around them. That's all part of the shift in consciousness. We cannot really act more consciously out in the world, even if we had good intentions. There are many humans, they have good intentions, but they haven't realized that something fundamental in their own state of consciousness is still dysfunctional. So, for example, if you look at the history of communism in Soviet Russia, the original communists, of course, they had good intentions. They wanted to improve the world. They wanted equality. They don't wanted exploitation of a small group of humans by others. That was all beautiful, wonderful. However, they did not realize that although they had good intentions, their own state of consciousness was really still the old consciousness, and the dysfunction embedded in the old state of consciousness was still operating. So out of their good intentions, they created the same or even worse evils that they had before in society, because the ego, they didn't know about the ego in their own minds, so the people who assumed power became virtually insane, like Stalin, who was responsible for killing millions of people. But he came out of what was originally a good intention of having a world that is fair and equitable. So, and again, we have people who talk about the environment. Of course, it's wonderful to be to do whatever you can to not pollute the environment anymore. But we need to go to the root cause of this, the insensitivity and the greed that lies behind what we are doing to our planet. So we need to get to the root cause of the unconsciousness in the human mind. Otherwise, our good intentions will again lead to destruction and havoc. As the old proverb says, the road to hell is paved with good intentions.
And what can we do to promote this message of consciousness? I mean, obviously you're out there, you're a big player in the spiritual teachings world, but what else can be done to get more people to take up this message and start to do this work that needs to be done on themselves?
Well, the primary, every human being, his or her first responsibility is to look at their own mind and to embrace the message and to live it, to begin to live it. So to begin to live this message is more vital and more fundamental than trying to talk about it to others. That's a secondary matter that may be important too. But living it is the most important thing, that you yourself embody that changed state of consciousness. Even if you cannot yet fully embody it, at least that it begins to operate in your life. But the question is whether any human being is even ready to hear this message. And so the individual needs to understand what the basic message is and what the basic dysfunction in the collective mind is, which of course will also be a dysfunction in their own minds. So, and the dysfunction we could call the egoic state of consciousness.
All right, I want to ask you on the back of that, why there seems to be so little action to get involved in these kind of spiritual groups. Certainly, I mean, take a major city like London. I meet so many people that have read your book, The Power of Now or A New Earth. They say wonderful teaching, but they actually don't seem to want to actually go out there and kind of do more, to get more involved. I think a lot of people read it and think fantastic book, put it on the shelf and don't really, live it.
Yes, well, the question is whether they live it or not. I think it is true that there are people who read the book and then put it on the shelves and then maybe forget. There are others in whom the book, and not just the books that I wrote, but there are other books around also which are extremely helpful. In other humans, the book actually does bring about a shift in consciousness or a beginning of the awakening. It doesn't necessarily mean that humans then form groups. The transformation in humans can happen individually. They just begin to live it in their daily lives. But and if those humans who put the book back on their shelves, they will eventually put it up again. And when will they pick the book up again? They will pick it up when they can't stand the suffering anymore in their lives, the self-created suffering. So the individual needs to ask him or herself not why do so few humans embrace this teaching, or why can't we see the manifestation of it in the outside world. The more important question is for every individual to ask him or herself, why, for example, why don't I live it? Or could I live the new consciousness more consistently, can I embrace it in all aspects of my life? It's the individual's responsibility, primarily when we talk about shift in consciousness. Always look to yourself rather than asking, why isn't it happening out in the world? That's a secondary question. The primary question is it happening in myself? So that's what the individual needs to look at, because it's easy to put responsibility out onto others and say, humans are not really awakening, are they? Okay, that may be true or untrue, but the primary approach is, am I awakening? And in what areas of my life am I not awakened?
Eckhart, do you see that we will be living in an enlightened world at some point in the future?
Yes, I have no doubt. What I don't know is when that's going to be. I also don't know whether the world we live in now is going to shift into the new consciousness as the old the structures that were created by the old consciousness, the economic structures, the political structures and social structures, of course they have to dissolve. They can't. Those are structures created by the dysfunctional consciousness, and therefore, for example, we have a dysfunctional economy. At the same way that communism was created by the dysfunctional consciousness, and it had to collapse. So of course, our economic system inevitably will have to collapse. Now, whether the collapse, whether the new will immediately come out of the old, or whether we first have to regress in the same similar way in which after the Roman Empire collapsed, which was relatively more civilized, it wasn't all that civilized, but relatively more civilized than other cultures, and then when we experienced the so-called Dark Ages, when definitely there was a regression in human consciousness for 600, 700 years, or longer, or maybe almost 1,000 years. And it is possible that humans have to create, that the havoc that the old consciousness creates cannot be stopped here on the planet, and we'll have to go through some kind of massive destruction, then regress collectively, and until finally something new emerges. So that's another possibility. But whatever change in consciousness happens in the individual human being now is not lost, because whatever change in consciousness happens to the individual human being becomes part of the collective consciousness of humanity, because we are linked to each other at a deeper level. Or every human the human individual consciousness does not exist in isolation from the collective human consciousness. So any human who goes through a spiritual awakening now, even if collectively humanity has to go through a regressive period, that is not less, it will be the seed for the new consciousness. And it is possible that the new consciousness will come about without having to go through massive destruction. I don't have the answer to that, but whatever it is, I'm confident that eventually human beings will reach a transformed state of consciousness, and out of that will create a totally different world.
And given the cyclic nature of the universe, if we all, say, became enlightened and lived in this world that you're talking about, will it eventually all collapse in on itself and start over again?
Well, there's still an enormous amount of evolution to go through, and I believe, for example, eventually what we experience as the material universe will no longer be material. To experience the universe as solid and heavy matter, that gradually will change, and we will experience the forms of the universe not in the way in which we experience the forms of all the different life forms and physical forms of the universe. We will not experience them as a material universe, so it will be a more ethereal universe corresponding to that different state of consciousness. So we experience the universe now as heavily material, but that is, as I see it, mainly a reflection of our state of consciousness. It's impossible for us to describe or even imagine how humans will then experience the universe, but we can have little hints. For example, everybody who goes through a spiritual awakening experiences a lessening of, I sometimes call it a lessening of density in the way in which they perceive themselves. There's a lightness that comes into your life as you awaken spiritually. There's no longer the heaviness that comes with unconscious reactivity that the unawakened humans are trapped in, the heaviness that is there when you're totally identified with the voice in the head that continuously talks and talks and talks, the unconscious thought processes that most people are totally identified with. And when you look at another human being out of the unenlightened state of consciousness, what you see is primarily the physical body, and you relate to that, and then you see their psychological makeup. This is so in the unenlightened state of consciousness, you experience the other human as primarily as the physical form, and then as the psychological form, which is made out of the human mind. In other words, the ego. So you relate to the physical form and the egoic form. But as you awaken spiritually, when you meet another human being and you relate to another human being, yes, you're still aware of their physical form. Yes, you're still aware of their ego structure and whatever comes out of that. But you're also aware of something deeper in the other human. And that something deeper is not their body and it's not their egoic mind. There is an essence to the other human that you can only sense, no matter how dysfunctional the human may be out in their egoic deluded state, but there is an essence there that you can sense, as long as you can sense the essence of who you are in yourself, then you can sense and feel it in others. So you're no longer just reacting to their ego or looking at their body. You're also responding to something deeper that is in them. That is really where love arises between human beings, to go beyond the physical form and to go beyond the psychological form to something and recognize a deeper reality that cannot be analyzed conceptually, cannot even be described. And what is that deeper reality? That deeper reality is consciousness itself, the unconditioned consciousness, and that is the divine in every human. But you can only sense it in the other when you can sense it in yourself. That comes first, and then you can relate lovingly to others, because no matter whom you meet, you're ultimately always meeting a reflection of your own divine reality in the other. And so you can look through, so to speak, through their physical form, and you can look through the egoic form to something deeper. So you no longer just react to the other people's egos. You acknowledge the ego, but also compassion comes in, because you don't hold other people's egos against them. You're not equating their perhaps dysfunctional behavior with who they are in their essence. So there's compassion comes in, and I'm giving this in answer to your question, what kind of a universe would we inhabit when we go? So the beginning of that you can experience as you go through the shift in consciousness in your changed relationships with other human beings. So they lose their density, so to speak. There's not just a physical body. There's not just the egoic psychological form. There is, and that's a wonderful thing when you no longer meet these dense bodies, but you meet actually almost for ethereal beings.
And this is achieved by being present, essentially, with somebody.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, being completely present, non-judgmental, with giving them your complete attention, and not impose mental labels on them, and not react to if they manifest unconsciousness, whatever it is, anger, whatever. Then you're not forced to react. You simply acknowledge it and recognize it as it's the ego in them.
You're listening to an interview from spiritualmatters.org.
Eckhart, we wanted to actually put to you a few questions that are coming from our listeners.
Yes.
Interesting questions. Firstly, there's a question here. Would an enlightened person necessarily be a vegetarian?
I don't think so. I don't give any rules or regulations or what an enlightened person should be doing or would be doing, because it manifests in so many different ways. I think an enlightened person would probably avoid unnecessary suffering. So what we do to animals in slaughterhouses, the treatment of animals, is definitely a reflection of the unenlightened consciousness. We have in ancient traditions, in ancient cultures, a reverence for nature and a reverence for animals. For example, when North American Indians, they had a ritual which was to be followed, and many other earlier cultures have that. Before they killed an animal for food, they would show their respect to the animal internally, and they had a ritual to go through, and even sometimes after killing the animal, to acknowledge that the ultimate divinity that's also in the animal, and their respect for that dimension, the animal world. So there was respect for that. There was also realization that they had to do that. Then in the same way that we even kill the vegetables, because the vegetable is also a live being, and at the stage that we are at now, we are unfortunately still forced to kill other life forms. Even if they're vegetative life forms, they are also beautiful manifestations of the divine. So the reverence and respect even towards the life forms, but unfortunately we still need to kill in order to survive, that is vital. So that definitely is not practiced in the massive slaughterhouses that we have on our planet. That's a dreadful thing. Dreadful. And so if humans still consume meat, they would be very careful with what kind of meat that is they consume. So it would have to be definitely not coming from factory farms. I believe every human would pay great attention to that. But whether the individual human is a vegetarian or not, I believe only he or himself have to decide, to listen within and see what it is that you feel is right for you. Ultimately, of course, life is not the physical form, no matter whether it is a plant life or animal life, because every life form is a manifestation of the one life, and ultimately the essence of every life form is indestructible. But the thing is, once we sense that, then we respect every life form, because we realize that the essence is divine in every life form. It's one with being, one with the one source, the one life. So the recognition of oneness is a vital part of the awakening process and the awakened human being. So we see the oneness of all life, and respect is really the vital word here. Respect for other life forms, but not equating the form with the ultimate reality of that life. So that's really the wider answer to the question that was just asked.
So is it as bad to kill an animal as a plant?
Well, in both, some people say an animal has a more evolved consciousness and than a plant. Other people might say no, it's just a different form of consciousness. It is true, of course, that if we look at different animals, every human being knows intuitively that some animals seem to be more highly evolved in their consciousness. For example, probably everybody has killed a fly or a mosquito in their lives. So, and I don't think many human beings would have um, pangs of conscience that they killed a fly or mosquito a few times in their lives, or you stepped on a worm, or you killed a beetle in your home, or ants that invaded your home. On the other hand, if you killed a dog, that would leave more of a trace in your psyche of something, a kind of transgression, because everybody knows that it can sense that a dog has a more highly developed consciousness than the ant. Not that in essence the life that manifests through the ant is not the same life that manifests through the form of the dog, but I would say perhaps that the life, the consciousness, the dog is a more fuller manifestation of consciousness into this world than the little beetle, which is also a manifestation of consciousness, but not as fully grown out in the world of manifestation. Or there's even in some Buddhist countries, there's the belief that if you kill another human being, the more evolved that human being is, the greater is your guilt. There's the belief if you kill a criminal, then you're not as guilty. The karmic debt is not as heavy for you as when you kill a Buddhist monk or a highly evolved being. Then the karmic debt would be massive. That's the belief in some Buddhist countries.
Okay. Now, just another question here, and this one says, how much do we need to connect with our childhood for spiritual healing?
Well, as you become more present to what goes on in your emotional field and your mind, that you may discover certain patterns in your mind that you weren't aware of before, reactive patterns that originate in childhood, in things that happened to you as a child. So the remembrance of things that happened in childhood may come naturally as you become more present of your own conditioning, because a large part of your own conditioning actually goes back to childhood. Then, of course, it goes beyond that also, because there's cultural conditioning. Your whole culture and the history of your culture that you grew up in and so on is all part of your conditioning. I don't think it's necessary to specifically delve into, except in exceptional cases perhaps, where there were extremely traumatic events, but I don't think it is necessary to specifically search out your past for areas of suffering or whatever. It is more important to bring attention to the present moment, because whatever is unconscious in you, somehow the challenges of life in the present moment will bring out the unconsciousness that is in you in the form of reactions, of emotions, of thought patterns, and so on. So it's more important to pay attention to what arises in the present, knowing that whatever arises in the present out of your conditioning actually is, of course, comes from your past. It's past conditioning.
And this lady also asks, does a child spirit come first and look for parents?
I don't know. I think there's not so much looking, but I would say there's a vibrational frequency. Every human being, out of their state of consciousness, embodies a certain vibrational frequency, and so some humans are, even in this life here, some humans are drawn to other humans, and sometimes groups of humans are drawn together. They form groups, or they are drawn to a particular part of town because their vibrational frequency matches. And so the same, I would say, is probably the case with the disembodied human, not yet awakened spark of consciousness that we sometimes call the soul, which is not a separate entity, but really is still connected to the source of all life, but doesn't know it. And so really what seeks, as I see it, what seeks to incarnate again, what seeks another life, is all the unconsciousness, the unfulfilled desires, the longing for further sensory experience, which implies the longing for further suffering also. And so the vibrational frequency is probably drawn to whatever corresponds to its own frequency. So I think in that sense one can say you seek, but it's an unconscious process. I don't believe it is a conscious process.
Now, Eckhart, you spent some time in the UK, and I understand that you felt you needed to leave for Canada to write your book. Why was that?
I didn't specifically feel that I had to go to Canada. What I woke up one morning and I felt I have to move to the west coast of North America. And then I left after it took a while to get rid of everything, and I left first for Vancouver, Canada, and then I took a bus to California, and then in California, after a few weeks, I started writing The Power of Now. But I hadn't gone there with the intention of writing a book. I didn't know why I had to go there. I was drawn there energetically, and only after the book started to come through, so to speak, I realized that I had to be in that energy field on the west coast. It could be west coast of Canada or west coast of the United States, but I had to be there for the book to be drawn out of me, so to speak. England, however, was a vital part of my awakening, so I still feel a very strong energetic link with England, more than with any other country, and I love the energy field of the lands, the countryside of England, and I also love the people. I always felt drawn there, but for some reason I woke up there one morning knowing that I had to leave. I didn't know why, but the west coast of North America, if I analyze it now retrospectively, the west coast of North America is a very open energy field where very little accumulated past everything is new and has no, even the social structures and everything is loose, nothing is rigid, anything is possible. There's a certain lightness there that even on the east coast of America is not there. It's very much more like Europe already, where there's a heaviness of past to some extent. So it seems I had to go out into that energy field in order to give birth to the book. And so I still very much enjoy coming back to England. It always feels a little bit like coming back home, and sometimes when I see English movies, I feel a little bit of nostalgia.
Have you been to St. Albans?
No, I haven't.
No, you have to come and visit St. Albans next time. It's a beautiful city.
Oh, yes,
Yeah.
yes, I'd like to, yeah.
Eckhart, just coming back to the book, when you were writing, did you have any idea of how big it was going to be? Did you have a sense of that?
No. That was a big surprise. With The Power of Now, I thought some people who are already deeply into spiritual awakening or transformation, they will be drawn to it and they will like, and the book will help them. That's what I thought. And I had no idea that vast numbers of people would embrace the book, and it would be just was beyond my dreams that this would happen. And it happened at first slowly. Some people described it as an underground bestseller for the first couple of years because it only grew through word of mouth. And then at some point, Oprah read the book, and that was the beginning of a very rapid growth that can only come through Oprah.
You also spent some time with the Dalai Lama, I see.
Yes, last year I met the Dalai Lama, who came to Vancouver for the Peace Conference, and I spent some time with him, and I took part in a couple of discussions, in public discussions. One was about creativity, and another one about, I believe it was education. So it was wonderful to meet him. The Dalai Lama we are very lucky to have him. He's a great teacher, and his main teaching, although his words are lovely, but his main teaching is being. He teaches what he is his teaching. He doesn't carry an ego, so when he relates to other humans, it's wonderful to see the egolessness in him. So his being is his teaching. The words are secondary. In fact, he laughs a lot, of course, and very often when people ask him complicated questions, he looks at you and he says, I don't know. Why do you ask me? I'm a simple monk.
That's very
his
funny.
favorite answer is, I don't know. There's enormous, not only honesty, but also enormous strength in it. And sometimes after he said, I don't know, a few minutes later, he actually says something meaningful. There's also spiritual teaching in there, because the intuitive intelligence comes not out of the state of knowing already. The intuitive intelligence comes out of the state of a state of clarity in which there's space of not thinking, in which you don't know anything. So in other words, you go into the stillness. You have to go into not knowing first before you can know intuitively. So you go into not knowing, you become still inside. If you become still inside, then the deeper level opens up of the unconditioned consciousness, because your human mind, which is not still, that's the conditioned from the past. But if you want to have an intuitive insight, a new creative idea, then you have to become still first. Really, I think that's what the I don't know really means. But most humans, of course, would be reluctant to say, I don't know. Because, of course, the Dalai Lama, if he had an ego, he would think, well, I'm the Dalai Lama and I'm supposed to know, so I better say I know.
I also wanted to ask you about other spiritual teachers. I mean, the show we're doing here is about introducing people to a diverse range of different teachings. And I wanted to ask, who, in your opinion, should we be talking to on the show next? Who out there is doing a great job as you see it, either known or unknown?
Well, there are quite a few. For example, I don't know if you have spoken to Byron Katie.
No, I know of Byron Katie, the work.
Yes, I love that. I know her also personally. I spent some time with her and her husband, Stephen Mitchell, who has also done some wonderful books. And so Byron Katie's work, I think, is very significant. It's very simple, and it has helped many, many people to become aware of their own minds and to disidentify from their thinking. It's all very, very practical, so I like that. And just the greatest way to learn about her is not so much to ask her questions, but to witness the way in which she works with people, which is just wonderful to witness. She works with individuals one-on-one, usually on stage in public. Gangaji, she also works on stage with individuals, and really awareness practice, bringing awareness into your thinking mind, so that you're no longer completely identified with your thinking mind. By the way, there are more women arising now, spiritual teachers, which is wonderful to see, and I think that's going to intensify in the years to come, that the transformed or the awakened consciousness will come more and more quickly through women, and so very soon probably, traditionally all the spiritual teachers were men, but very soon that's going to change, and there will be more spiritual teachers, women, than women teachers than men. It's wonderful to see. So finally the feminine will become very vital, a vital factor in the awakening of consciousness.
All right, Eckhart, we're running out of time, so I just want to ask you finally, if you had to send people away with one message from all your teachings, what would it be?
Well, one message would be that very simply, be more aware of the absolute importance of the present moment in your life, because that's all you ever have. There's only ever this moment. Don't give more importance to some imagined future or some remembered past moment than this moment. Honor this moment, and above all, don't reject it or judge it, but become friendly with whatever form this moment takes. It's life manifesting for you in this form at this moment. And if you, instead of denying it or wanting some other moment, give it your full attention, acknowledge it, embrace it, and become friendly with the present moment, no matter in what form it arises. That opens up something deeper inside you. There was a teaching by I actually mentioned that little story last night when I gave the talk here in New York. A Japanese woman teacher 100 years ago, she was awakened, and a man came to her and said, "Can you please give me some spiritual practice, because I'm continuously anxious and stressed, and I don't like the way I am and the way I behave, and I want to find inner peace. Can you give me a spiritual practice?" And she said, "Yes," she said, "every morning and every evening, and whenever anything happens to you, say these words. Say, 'Thanks for everything. I have no complaint whatsoever.'" So that was her the advice she gave him. The man came back a year later and said, "I practiced what you did. It hasn't worked for me. I'm still the same person. I'm still anxious. I'm still a jerk. It hasn't worked for me." And the woman looked at him and said, "Thanks for everything. I have no complaint whatsoever." And at this moment, the man awoke and suddenly became very joyous. He suddenly realized the depth of what it really means. Except whatever happens at this moment, whatever is, thanks for everything. I have no complaint whatsoever. That stops your egoic mind.
Okay, now Eckhart, you've got your London shows coming up on the 22nd and 23rd of October.
Yes.
Billed as the special sessions.
Yes.
What's special about them?
I have no idea. Somebody must have come up with that.
You're going to have to make them special now, though, you realise.
Yes.
Eckhart, thank you so much for joining us on the show. It's been fantastic to talk to you. Thank you for taking the time out. And
Thank you. I enjoyed it very much.
We wish you the best of luck with the shows. We hope to see you there. And we'll hope to speak to you again at some time in the future.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
You've been listening to an interview from spiritualmatters.org.